I'm Charles Seeholzer with Buchla Electronic Musical Instruments, and I am a new engineer. I help with R&D and rapid prototyping at Buchla. And I'm going to be going over the new 252E Polyphonic Rhythm Generator. So the Polyphonic Rhythm Generator, in its most straightforward form, can be considered a 3-voice sequencer module. You have your 3 triggers up here, which correspond to, in the pulses view, the red, green, and blue pulses that are viewed on the rings. Then each of those pulse outputs can have a corresponding one of these 3 CV outputs as its pitch output, and one of these other 3 CV outputs as its velocity outputs, allowing you to do full sequencing, dynamic sequencing of up to 3 voices. The module has a master clock down here, a master BPM, and then 3 assignable clocks, so you can have up to 3 different rings running at any one time. The upper of the 3 clocks is the master clock, which is has each division as a quarter note value following the master BPM down here. And each ring after that, depending on the sync mode, will sync itself up to that master ring. So, for example, if we have it in on 1 sync, that means that it takes the same amount of time for every single ring to do 1 full revolution, regardless of how many divisions are in that ring. So here I have the 12 ring active as a slave to the 4 ring, and that gives me 16th note triplets or a 12/4 polyrhythm. I also, down here, have the 7 ring active, which gives me a 7/4 polyrhythm. Each of these 3 clocks can be CV selected. CV input to this blackjack here will do the equivalent of turning this knob, and sending a pulse into this jack here will select the ring, but as you can see, it doesn't actually switch the active ring until the cycle restarts up at the 1 cell position. So very flexible clocking over here. Over in our pulse editing section, this is for navigating the different rings and the cells in the rings. We have a built-in Euclidean pattern library, so if you want some inspiration for rhythmic patterns, you can go into that mode and scroll through the different Euclidean patterns that are available. Each ring and each layer in each ring can be adjusted with this phase knob, which allows you to shift the contents of a ring without actually having to destructively edit those contents.
We done live too?
Yes, absolutely. As a ring is being played, you can go in and shift the contents. Each individual cell can have, as I said before, one of 3 pulses, and for that cell, you can adjust the lag behind or pushing it ahead of that point in the grid, allowing you to create very dynamic shuffles and swings on a per cell basis, rather than doing something like, say, a 56% swing that affects the entire measure. We have pulse durations because the Buchla pulse output is a 10-volt transient to indicate the start of a trigger, and then a 5-volt gate for duration. So here, this knob goes from a transient pulse that is just a 10-volt pulse that just then immediately goes back to 0 volts. And as you increase this knob, you adjust the gate from non-existent to the full length of the cell, allowing you to get different sustained lengths of notes in a pattern. Another great feature is the ability to subdivide the cells. Each cell can have up to 7 subdivisions, which come out of a separate subdivision pulse output up at the top here. And those subdivisions can be shifted from being evenly spaced within a cell to having the initial pulse happen and then the rest of the subdivisions sort of closer together and crowded at the end of each cell, allowing for things like quick flams before a percussive sound or something like that. Then for the other layers, we have the CV editing. So we can go up here and select the different CVs, and each cell can contain CV information for any combination of these 6 different CVs. This dashed display indicates a sustain, which is the default for all cells. So when you enter in a CV, when that CV becomes active on that output, it will sustain that CV until it reaches another one. And the really convenient thing about this numerical display, going along with the Buchla standard of 1.2 volts per octave, is each click is a decimal point increase, and each decimal point increase is a semitone. So that makes it very easy to do melodic compositions. And it's simple to get away from that just by pressing in the encoder and adjusting in actual millivolts to get very precise editing of control voltages, with the decimal point indicator showing that there's more fine-tuned values after what's displayed on the screen in the tens of volts display. Trying to think of what else. I think that pretty much, MIDI capabilities. So for these, as I mentioned, you can think of these as pitch and velocity pairs for one of these 3 voices. This supports MIDI input either through a 225E MIDI module, the new USB MIDI firmware for the USB firmware card, or the internal busing from the 218 easel keyboard controller. And in this mode, if you hold down the CV edit knob, the display changes to in, and whichever cell you have selected will be filled with a corresponding pitch and velocity CV to what is played on the MIDI keyboard, or what MIDI event is sent to it. And so when you're in this mode, the select button actually will select through pairs of CVs so that you know where the matching pitches and velocities are going to be stored. Then the last MIDI capability is down here on the master BPM. If you hold down this encoder, it goes to the MIDI sync mode. Off is no sync. SRC is sync receive, so it receives MIDI beat clock, again from a 225E module or the USB firmware MIDI software. And sync transmit transmits the MIDI beat clock via that USB firmware card update, which is really great. The receive is really useful for if you have other gear that you already sequenced and you want to sync this up with that. If you have a DAW project where you have a whole tracked song and you want to incorporate this into it, you can actually sequence with this on the grid of your project. And the reverse is true as well. If you wanted to do an entire performance with this as the main temporal element, then this could be driving the grid of the multi-track recording DAW, allowing you to go back at a later date and edit on the grid and add time-based effects that were actually in time with whatever you had sequenced and performed with this module. So this is not yet currently available for order, but will be within the next few months. It's $2,500 for the module itself, and for the module in a H-Series 3 boat with an H-Series module that does MIDI to CV and one that does CV to MIDI, it's $3,000.